The University of Maryland has launched a new institute dedicated to developing the next generation of artificial intelligence people. The Artificial Intelligence Interdisciplinary Institute will support research focusing on responsible and ethical AI across industry and government. For details, Federal News Network's Eric White spoke to the Institute's director, Professor Hal Daume.
Sort of proximally, the Institute got started because last summer the provost came to us and said, what would it look like to have an institute that crosses all of campus and, sort of unifies AI everywhere in research and education? And so we had a working group last summer that put together a vision document of what that might look like and what it would take. And, I have to say, somewhat surprisingly, maybe for a public university, less than 6 months later, we actually have an announcement of a new thing. And, I think this is both sort of a sign of the times. This is, I think, a really important topic that lots of people are thinking about. But I also think it's also a signal that our president and provost are really good at moving fast when things are important.
Let me reiterate their question to you. What would it look like? And what is this institute going to include?
The goal here really is to think about how do we take AI, which is something that's, I think pretty clearly affecting almost everything these days, and think about it not just sort of from the perspective of like computer science or engineering, which is where it kind of historically has lived, and really think about it from the perspective of both the sort of different career paths that students might take, right? What does it look like to be a journalist in 5 years? What does it look like to be a professor in 5 years? But also like the expertise on campus. And I think one of the reasons this is really important is I think the big AI challenge that we face over the next 10 years is how do we figure out how to build AI systems that like reflect human values, that promote the well-being of humanity, that sort of like do good in the world. And, these questions of like, what are human values? Like, what happens to society? I mean, these are questions that like humanists study and social scientists study. These are not traditionally questions that computer scientists study. And so like, if we want to answer these questions, I think it's really essential that, kind of everyone is at the table as an equal player.
So is this institute going to focus more on the ethics of AI use and development rather than the actual creation of it, or is it going to be a little bit of both?
I think the goal is that it's a little bit of both. I think University of Maryland has had a strength in AI sort of research and development, technology development, whatever you want to call it, for decades. And, so a lot of this is sort of like building on that strength, but also sort of shifting it a little bit so that we're thinking about not just developing technology for the sake of developing technology, which is, I think, how a lot of maybe engineering mindset people think, but really thinking specifically about like, okay, what is the impact of this technology on people? How do I change my practices and change the type of AI system that I develop so that, it's most likely to have like a positive impact on people?
We're speaking with Hal Daume. He is a computer scientist professor at the University of Maryland and the new director of UMD's AI Institute. We talk a lot about ethical AI. It is a term that has a different meaning, it seems like, to everyone. And yeah, as you just mentioned, in the past, it did seem whenever a new technology came along, it was, let's just create it, let's put it out there and let the chips fall where they may, and we'll see what happens. Do you see as AI as being different because of the magnitude of what its impact could be?
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes AI different, and I guess when I say AI, I really mean sort of like data-driven, either decision-making or generation of, say, documents or images or something like that, right? So the data-driven, I think, is the key here. And I think what we're seeing increasingly is that data is available in a huge wide variety of domains now, which means that the potential for applying sort of this single technology to a wide variety of domains has now become like a practicality, whereas previous approaches to AI that were maybe not data-driven didn't really have that potential to be broadly applied.
It just seems as if, for the first time, the folks who actually are responsible for inventing it and getting it out there for consumer use seem to be the ones that are the most hesitant to say, okay, let's just, take a pause here for a second, whereas usually that's not the case, at least from what I've seen as far as, just covering technology. But I didn't know if that was maybe what you experience or how you feel about it.
Yeah, I think that what we see in sort of like technology development in general is really this, like you said, we'll push it out, we'll see what happens. And, I think there's a lot of value to this. And I think that, lots of really useful technologies have been developed this way. I think what we're coming to realize is that like a key property, I think, of almost any AI system is that it's not going to be perfect. Like all of these data-driven systems, right? They're sort of doing their best given the data that they've seen in the past. And I think unlike a lot of traditional computer science, where, for instance, you can prove that the system I deploy will do X, Y, and Z, nowadays we're in this kind of world where we're like, well, I hope it does X, Y, and Z. And what we're seeing is that when it doesn't, sometimes the mistakes that it makes, which are often really hard to foresee, can have pretty consequential impacts on people's lives, right? Like we've seen examples of Medicaid getting withheld that led to a big case in Arkansas. And, we've seen cases of people getting into fist fights over translation errors and, all sorts of things where this property of AI that, it's not exactly unique to AI, but I think AI really brings it to the forefront that, these systems are just not going to be perfect. And so how do we engineer something around that that lets people still use them productively while also taking into account the fact that, yeah, they're going to make mistakes and we need to make sure that those mistakes don't cause, sort of irreparable harm or even, large magnitude harm to people.
Getting back to the Institute, so it sounds as if, you're saying AI is going to be creeping into so many different things that you're not necessarily just looking for the people that are, trying to get into the AI field when they graduate. This could be something for, say, a journalism student or a first-year medical student may want to try and get their hands on just to see where exactly the technology lays. Did I make a wrong assumption there?
No, that's exactly right. So at the undergraduate level, I mean, we're planning on rolling out some degree programs on AI. But in some ways, I think that some of the really exciting stuff is on what I'm kind of calling like the path to AI, where the idea is that, pretty much any freshman who shows up on campus, no matter what your major is, should have a breadth of AI-related courses that they can take that will help prepare them for their future career, but also for their future time as a student. Right? Because, AI is affecting the lives of students just like it's affecting the lives of normal people or non-students. And, so I think that the real potential here is, how do we build this sort of AI-minded future workforce, both among our current students and then also through like professional certificate programs. So people who are current day nurses or current day journalists or, current day K-12 teachers or something, right, can come and, sort of upskill around AI as it affects their profession.
Yeah, there's nothing normal about being a college student. I can attest to that for sure.
This is true.
Well, what about the folks that are trying to get into the AI field in particular? Are the jobs that many of the AI, I'll call them apologists, have said that, they'll counterbalance the jobs that are eliminated by AI? Are there going to be actual careers there as far as maintaining and just kind of controlling AI rather than actually, doing a job that the AI is actually doing itself?
I think that's a great question. And I'll take a step back, right? Like when I say that, AI is transforming industries, right? It is also transforming computer science, right? And we see a bunch of tools, I think like GitHub Copilot is probably the one that's most recognized. There was just an announcement a couple of days ago about a new sort of software development oriented AI system, right? And so I think the face of programming itself is changing. And in the same way that we might ask, is there a future career for journalists, just to pick on you? We could also say, is there a future career for programmers? And, I guess I'm an optimist. Like, I think that these jobs will shift and how people will spend their time will shift. But I don't think that the jobs themselves are going anywhere. One way that I think is useful to think about this is that what AI systems are good at automating is tasks. And one person's job is not just one task. Like the easiest example here is self-driving taxis. The taxi driver, they drive, but they also clean the car. They also talk to passengers. They collect fares, right? There's a lot more to this job than just the single task of driving the car. And so